I'm back with another update on the spun cotton sculpture. I'm showing here a little bit of the work that I have been doing, adding cotton to the sculpture. At this point, this was last week. I finally decided to work on the hands and on the legs. So I'm using thin layers of cotton to bulk up the leg here and try to keep the shape that I had at the beginning. This has definitely been a learning process. In some ways, it's like sculpting with clay, and in some ways, it's just completely different. And as I'm going, I'm learning the different materials I can use and manipulate. Here I'm working on the thigh. I had started a thigh with a very definite, I guess you would say, crease between the body and where the leg comes out, and I wanted to build that up a bit, and I want to make it as much as possible like the one on the other side. So this first one's going to end up being very rough, and I can see moving forward where I'll refine the process as I learn more and learn what tools I can use to manipulate things. It's fun, and I can see a lot of potential with it, but again, this one's definitely not going to be perfect. I'm speeding up the video because overall this process I don't think is very exciting. It's more exciting to me when I see the work when it's revealed at the end. And I think it's a little bit difficult to show everything here because it is such a learning process. There's been a couple of times where I've added the hands where I've sort of ripped things back apart. When the cotton is wet, you can kind of remove it a little bit. But for the most part, what you're putting on here is done. You've done it, and you've got to figure it out how to work with it if it's not quite what you're wanting to do. I'm trying my best to keep both sides as symmetrical as possible. But I am discovering that sometimes parts of it are larger or puffier than I intended. And I think this is just my lack of experience with this medium. This is my first time using it. I did note that in the tutorial I watched, she did mention that when you are working on a frame like this, sometimes the end product ends up being larger than what you're expecting. And I did notice that, especially with this foot. I actually prefer the first foot that I created versus the second foot. And I'll show you some detailed photos or video shots of that in just a moment. Taking a look at the feet here, it demonstrates what I mean about one size becoming puffier or larger than the other. So what happens when you're working with the cotton is you're building up layers, and I'm also trying to add detail at the same time, and inadvertently then in some of that detail or layers, the part that I'm working on has more layers than I expect and then becomes larger. So in this one, I feel like the first foot, the toes had a lot of great detail and they were around the sizing that I wanted them to be. But the second foot, I feel like is larger and more splayed out. I've tried working it and reworking it, but I think that it's just going to be this foot that's sort of flexed or splayed out a bit. And I'm going to just have to deal with the fact that some of the toes are larger than I wanted them to be. Sometimes you have to accept your mistakes in art. And I've said before that I like wonky characters, and she's definitely going to be wonky. So in future sculpts that I do, I'll have to learn how to control that layering a lot more. Being that this is my first sculpt with spun cotton, I'm overall happy with the results so far. I kind of realized part of my mistake once I started working on the hands, the mistake that I had made with the feet. I had put sort of, I guess you would say, a cardboard piece to try to provide a base to put the foot on, and I think I made it too large. I did the same thing with the hands, and again, I think I made it too large. I ended up pulling it off while it was wet, cutting away some of the cardboard and going back in. I can actually get a nice rounded tube with the fingers, And the fingers right now are in a very rough state, but I was able to get things to be a little more realistic without using that cardboard hand shape. I still need to come back in and do some more detail, and I might be able to go back in with the foot as well. But I let it dry in this rough state, and then I'm going to re-wet parts of it and try to gently work it and make parts of this look a little more realistic. I don't need it to be photorealistic, but I just need it to feel a bit less like there are these chunks of the cotton tacked on. Now, of course, if I come back in and paint things, I might be able to change the way this looks a little bit. So my next challenge with this piece is to come back in, refine the hands, try to refine the foot. I'm going to see if I can re-wet these toes here and get these toes to be at least somewhat of the same size as the ones here. I'm also going to come in, I wanted to put a butterfly wing on either side of her head, and I'm going to add hair. I'm going to add hair by rolling wet pieces of cotton and applying that. I might put that in a video, we'll see. I am using these tools to help sculpt. You've probably seen them before when I was doing oil pastels. This one is actually for clay, and it has a silicone tip, so you can use it to sort of push in on clay and refine and make clear crease lines. This one, I have a whole set of them, are for nail art. And I liked that these had larger tips and wedges to them. The one thing I will say though, this was another area where I made a mistake. These had a little bit of oil pastel on them, and I didn't realize it. I thought I had wiped it all completely off. So I ended up contaminating this. You can see the little dot there. There's a few areas where she has like little bright blushes of color. Not sure if you can see it on her nose there. It's a little more pink. So I ended up contaminating bits of the sculpture, which leads me to how am I going to paint this? Most of the time when I've seen spun cotton sculptures, they are being used to create Christmas ornaments. So the people making them are using watercolor while the sculpture is still wet. And then the wet cotton sort of sucks up that watercolor for a nice kind of softer, hazier kind of look. Some people are using acrylic paint. I don't know if because I'm sort of replicating clay, if I want to keep this, you know, like white kind of stone feel to the way that it looks, this aesthetic, or if I want to add a lot of bright color to it. So that's something I'm debating about. If you have any thoughts on how I should paint it, let me know in the comments. Meanwhile, I need to go and finish my paintings. I've got 3 paintings started. Our goal is to try to create 10 pieces. Again, we'll see if I get there. I've got about a month and a half, maybe 5 weeks left before the due date for this. And I think I can definitely finish some paintings. We'll see how many I finish. I need to go edit the video for those, and I need to finish working on my sculpture. So I'm going to go do that. And like I said, if you have any thoughts about how I should paint her when I'm finished, let me know down in the comments, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.